This week, Cambridge University Library released nearly 10,000 pages of private documents belonging to Stephen Hawking. Most people remember Hawking as one of the greatest physicists of the modern age. What many don't realize is that for decades, he was also a determined advocate for disability rights. These papers don't just highlight scientific collaboration. They reveal sustained institutional advocacy and show how one voice helped reshape public understanding of disability in ways that still influence society today. Hawking was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, at just 21 years old. Doctors predicted he had 2 years to live. He lived another 55. During that time, he became one of the most recognizable scientists on the planet. Yet public narratives often framed his achievements as brilliance in spite of disability, as if the two were opposites. The historical record tells a different story. Hawking didn't simply live with ALS. He lived inside systems that were built without accessibility in mind, and he carefully documented those barriers. When Hawking began his career in the 1960s and 70s, disability rights were barely part of mainstream political conversation. There were no comprehensive protections in the UK. The Equality Act wouldn't arrive until 2010. In the United States, the Americans with Disabilities Act wasn't signed until 1990. Wheelchair users faced unreliable access to public spaces, universities, and transportation. Assistive technology was experimental. The prevailing assumption was that people with severe disabilities couldn't fully participate in academic or professional life. Hawking rejected that assumption outright. What stands out in these newly released documents is how early and consistently he treated advocacy as part of his public duty. He understood that visibility brings leverage, and he used it. The archive contains correspondence, policy letters, institutional memos, campaign materials, and personal reflections on accessibility. A recurring theme runs through all of it. Hawking didn't ask for special treatment. He demanded structural change. In letters from the 1980s, he pushed Cambridge to improve building access, elevators, ramps, doorways, laboratories, framing accessibility not as a personal favor, but as an institutional obligation. At the time, there was no enforceable legal framework requiring equal access. Hawking was making arguments that were moral, practical, and ahead of the law that would later codify them. The papers also document his work with disability rights organizations. He lent his credibility to campaigns for independent living, employment protections, and funding for assistive technology. His tone is strikingly clear. Disability was never portrayed as tragedy. Inaccessibility, he argued, was the real failure, and it was fixable. In one memo, he wrote, "The limitations are not in the person, they are in the environment we've built." That idea sits at the core of the social model of disability, shifting the focus from individual impairment to structural responsibility. The archive includes exchanges with policymakers as well. In the 1990s, Hawking communicated with members of Parliament about healthcare access for people with complex disabilities. Through written testimony and representatives, he argued for sustained public funding of communication technology. His case wasn't based on charity. It was based on principle. Society benefits when everyone can participate fully. He supported his claims with data, policy proposals, and institutional critique. Why does this matter now? Because the struggle he documented is not over. Laws like the ADA and the Equality Act established essential protections, but enforcement remains uneven. Implementation varies. Institutional resistance still exists. From a historical perspective, these documents show how real change happens, not automatically, not magically, but through pressure, persistence, and accountability. Hawking had extraordinary visibility, but he never acted alone. The papers reveal collaboration with activists, legal advocates, and policy experts, whose work rarely receives public recognition. Too often, Hawking's legacy is reduced to cosmology and black holes, while his advocacy becomes a footnote. That omission matters. It suggests disability rights are secondary when in reality, they are central to questions of equality and access. The documents also reveal the personal cost of advocacy. Hawking required constant medical support, full-time care, and custom-built technology that needed continual adaptation. He encountered inaccessible universities, conferences that couldn't accommodate communication needs, and public spaces designed as if disabled people didn't exist. Yet he continued to engage, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. This raises an important institutional truth. The burden of fighting for access should not fall on individuals with disabilities. When it does, it signals structural failure. But until systems change, advocacy remains essential. And documentation matters. These 10,000 pages don't rewrite Hawking's legacy, they clarify it. They show that brilliance and disability are not opposites, that scholarship and activism can coexist, and that public responsibility includes challenging the institutions that define opportunity. Historically and legally, this archive strengthens the record of how disability rights evolved, how influence can be used to drive reform, and how much work remains ahead. The value of these papers isn't scandal, it's instruction. They remind us that progress leaves a paper trail, that institutional change requires pressure, and that transparency sharpens history. Stephen Hawking once said, "However difficult life may seem, there is always something you can do and succeed at." The record proves he applied that belief not only to physics, but to advocacy, to holding institutions accountable, and to the slow, demanding work of building a more accessible world. That part of his legacy deserves to be understood, remembered, and continued.